Hi all. Today we're going to have a think about utility. Um, that is the satisfaction that consumers get from consuming the goods um, they buy, um, and what economists have to say about it. Is probably going to help to choose an everyday item like petrol if you're in the UK or gasoline if you're in the US. Um, and the demand function for gasoline um, models the relationship between the price of gasoline and the quantity demanded by consumers. Because gasoline is a normal good with few immediate substitutes, it follows the law of demand, resulting in a downward demand curve. Um, so the first thing we can do is identify the standard linear demand function. There is a little maths here, but it's not bad. Um, Once we've done a little maths, we can understand the inverse of that demand function, and we can evaluate price elasticity of demand in the short and long term. And we can account for demand curve shifters, income levels, substitute goods, complementary goods, all good stuff, and that will help us in our study of utility, our quick gallop through utility. So if I were to say Q equals, let's say it's the local town's demand for gasoline, um, 50,000 gallons, less as the price moves, the moderation in that demand for 1 unit of price movement. So the demand function would look in this example like Q equals 50,000 less 4,000p. In other words, at $3 a gallon, the quantity demanded would drop to 38,000 gallons. That's 50,000 less 12,000. At £4 a gallon, the quantity demanded would be 34,000. The price choke point at which consumption would just hit zero and people would stay at home, which is increasingly an option with working at home and digital working. That choke point is £12.50 a gallon. So the gasoline demand function links the consumed quantity to price, income, and fuel efficiency. We were talking about budgeting. This is something that's very familiar to adults, but to students, less familiar. They're sort of getting into the idea of budgeting and going to university and working with a limited budget as independent adults. So budgeting is at the heart of scarcity. Our concept of scarcity, it's a basic economic concept. It means that human wants and needs perhaps are endless, but perhaps not. And the world has a limited amount of resources available to individuals and societies. Because there's not enough of everything to go around, people and societies make choices about what is available. And scarcity is at the heart of income equity. And so the key ideas are limited resources, unlimited wants, and the relative, something is scarce when people want more than what is immediately available. And scarcity of diamonds is not going to trouble many people much, but scarcity of gasoline, most certainly is. And then, within our choices that we make, we have the concept of opportunity cost. Choosing one thing means giving up another because those resources are limited and we have limited budgets, and we must choose sort of wisely, so as to utilize our budget in the most sensible way. So choice in economics is the act of selecting one alternative over the others. It's driven by scarcity, that fundamental problem. Resources like time and money are limited. So every economic choice forces a trade-off, creating an opportunity cost defined by the value of the best foregone alternative. Now, in the case of gasoline, if we can picture our graph that we've drawn with our downward sloping demand curve, we've labeled that curve D, and the constant is where it sort of intersects with the sort of horizontal axis. So we have quantity and price on the axes, and gasoline is inelastic, in that if the price of gasoline does shift, people still need to buy gas. It has to shift an awful lot to generate long-term changes, like switching to home working or switching to electric cars and so on, although the price of energy, whether it be gasoline or electricity to drive a car, is pretty similar. So opportunity cost we've touched on. And then that brings us nicely to utility. In economics, utility is the total satisfaction or value that a person gets from using a good or service. It helps explains why people make specific choices with their limited money. Because satisfaction is internal and personal, it cannot be measured in the real world like weight or length, but it's a useful concept. Total utility is the full amount of happiness you get from all the units of a product combined. Marginal utility is the extra satisfaction you get from consuming one more unit of that product. And diminishing marginal utility, the rule that your sort of extra happiness goes down every time you consume another unit. So if the price of gasoline falls, you tend not to go out and buy all the gasoline you can and then run around in your car. You go on a road trip. Within your budget, you are gasoline has its place. So how utility is measured, cardinal utility is a theory that assumes you can put an exact number value called units on your satisfaction, and you can draw graphs. You typically you describe indifference curves when you think of utility maximization and budgets and what shifts the curve and so on. So that is the sort of classic idea on utility, that economic agents, consumers, firms and the government, they all derive utility from the goods that they consume. They earn income and spend it maintaining their households as consumers. And an individual consumer is assumed to make choices based on maximum satisfaction, well-being, or what we call utility. The amount consumers wish to purchase is called the quantity demanded. Demand is a flow, and in the aggregate, maybe our 50,000 gallons of gasoline a day, while the stock of gasoline at the wholesalers, at the refinery, might be a few days, or run into the millions of gallons. While that might be the case with the sort of industry structure, it's not the same for the consumer. The consumer has a limited amount of gasoline that they can store in their fuel tank. So when we're looking at this demand function, our Q equals 50 minus 4000p for the sake of argument, that can help us think. And once we've taken the step into from graphs into mathematics, then we can start doing interesting things like algebra, like calculus, and so on. Normally, which send people, worry people, quite unnecessarily. I mean, one reason why people get worried about mathematical economics is they're used to maths as it's taught in school, which is that, there can be a wrong way to get the right answer. Well, in economics, there are no, we're just happy to get an answer. We're not going to demand a mathematical proof in a precise way that may have suited Greeks, Chinese differently to Asians, differently to Europeans and Americans. If it works, it works. So maths in economics is far less daunting than maths as taught at school. I'm not decrying the utility of the way it's taught, but goodness me, it does put a lot of people off using maths to make their lives easier, every day in economics. So, faced with our demand function of quantity and price, there's nothing to stop us inverting the function and having price in relation to quantity. It just requires a bit of simple maths. If we allocate symbols to that formula of ours and say that Q equals A minus BP, then to invert the formula, price then equals A over B, and so on. So you can use the mathematical tool to make your life easier and go further with your sort of argument, if you are fearless. And this, of course, is particularly useful when you come to marginal analysis, which features a lot. We spent a lot of time distinguishing between average fixed cost, average variable cost, average total cost, and marginal cost, because when we come on to differentiation and integrals, you can see where the marginal analysis comes into its own, of what is fairly simple concepts. So the law of diminishing marginal utility, so as we consume more in a given time frame, the extra satisfaction, the marginal utility you form from each unit will um, start to decrease. And this law is the engine behind the law of demand, because each extra item gives us less and less satisfaction. We're only willing to buy more of that item if the price drops. So I hope that's been helpful. When we come on to more detailed consideration of budget constraints and maximizing satisfaction, where we can think more about what you do almost automatically walking down the supermarket aisle, and shifting your budget dynamically until you feel that you've got the best possible value for your money. So I hope that's helpful. A discussion of demand function and utility, consumer choice, and we sort of touched on indifference theory. And see you next time.